Welcome to Player Driven, everyone. I am joined by Laura Hall today. She is a senior player support specialist at Schell Games. I am super excited. I remember when I first put my quest on, playing I Expect You to Die, and just being so immersed into it. And I've been so excited to talk to someone from Schell Games. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. You want to do a little bit of introduction about yourself and let people know who you are?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Laura Hall. I am Senior Player Support Specialist at Schell Games. It's a position that we didn't previously have. We started this position about 4 or 5 years ago. And previous to that, I was a producer at Schell for about 4 years. And so a little bit about Schell Games. We do some internal IP projects. So the I Expect You to Die series. We've created Until You Fall, and a number of titles right now. We just launched Project Freefall, which is in earliest access on Steam. And we've created Among Us 3D, previously Among Us VR. And so we've done all kinds of internal IP as well as a fair amount of client work. And so we've worked with all kinds of really cool organizations from all over the place. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure to create a wide variety of games and experiences.
Yeah, you get to dabble in all these different technologies. Is there one you as a player, as well as someone that works in the industry, that excites you the most? Is it the VR? Is it working with companies that are healthcare related? Is it anything or all the above?
Yeah, I think in terms of the games that we've made at Shell, the VR experiences are really cool. I think that it's an aspect of gaming that there's a lot of gamers out there. You might be a mobile gamer, you might have a console. VR gamers, I think, are a specific breed, and I think at Shell we've gotten pretty darn good at making VR experiences. I think especially with experiences like Among Us 3D, we've been able to reach a different demographic of players that maybe have not previously experienced some of the Shell Games games. And because Among Us 3D is available both on Steam for non VR players and on Steam, PlayStation, Meta, and Pico for VR players, we kind of get to integrate with Among Us fans. We get to have VR enthusiasts, and we've just seen like a new segment of the market with that. So I think that's been a really special title for us, but it's really fun. Check out all the Shell Games games.
I got a question here, right? And Laura has mistakenly used the word Among Us VR, and I'm curious, was the plan to do a VR version exclusively and then realized, hey, there's players on the web that want to play this as well, so we're going to pivot and create the VR experience along with a 3D experience, allowing more people to play the game?
Very similar to that, just in the opposite order.
Hmm.
So we worked very closely with Innersloth to create what was originally Among Us VR. And Among Us VR was the VR version of Among Us. So what does that mean? You're playing in a 3D space, you're in a VR headset, and you're playing that iconic gameplay, but you're doing it in VR. And then we got a lot of feedback from our player community that said, like, hey, I don't have a VR headset, but this looks so cool and I love Among Us and I really want to try this out. And so we thought, well, maybe we could take this experience and bring it to PC so that folks without a VR headset could still play this experience. And so in May 2025, we launched Among Us 3D. We rebranded Among Us VR as Among Us 3D. So it's the same game, except now that it's also inclusive to non VR players.
So I am a big fan of I Expect You to Die. I played the first two, and then I think my quest is on its way out. But it's not as much as a community game as Among Us. And I'm curious if when you look at your community, and maybe you aren't quite certain of the answer, is like, do the different players converse with you differently? Do you hear as much from I Expect You to Die players as you do from, say, Among Us or Project Freefall?
So the first I Expect You to Die game that launched in 2016. That community is alive and well. We hear from them tremendously. And you're right, it's a very different audience than what we see from Among Us 3D. Among Us 3D right now, from the player support perspective, we definitely get the most correspondence about Among Us 3D. But we certainly still continue to hear from the I Expect You to Die crowd as well. The content of the communications, it's very different. So Among Us 3D being a live online multiplayer game versus the I Expect You to Die experiences where you're in the headset, it's not multiplayer, you're kind of on this journey as a spy by yourself. We get a lot of like design questions like, hey, I'm really having trouble beating this level. What am I doing wrong? And they're like, well, we don't want to spoil it for you. Here's some hints. Or like, send us a video of your gameplay and we can say, oh, yeah, no, they missed that little shard of glass that you need to. So there's definitely a different kind of composition there versus the Among Us 3D crowd who's saying like maybe they had an issue with another player. And so we want to make sure that from a moderation perspective, we're supporting those requests. Maybe they're having trouble getting online, so we want to help them work through a bug there. It's just a very different composition of what players might be wondering about the game, especially for a game that's been out since 2016. When we're talking about I Expect You to Die, a lot of those inquiries that are coming in are like, okay, I've looked at speed runs of this, I've watched other people playing this, or someone said in a forum somewhere like that this is available. Could I get one of those too? Like those kinds of questions for a game that might be just a little, it's been around a little bit longer, it's got a little more reputation, and a lot of the questions have already been answered, and those answers are out there on the internet. So a lot of our players are savvy to find that. We're doing updates on Among Us 3D all the time, so there are new questions, new content questions, new, live type of live ops questions that might come up as well.
What's one skill you learned from your zoo days that ended up being more valuable in the game development world than you learned from inside the industry?
Soft skills, people skills, absolutely people skills. So when I worked at the zoo, I was there for 6 years, working with keepers, working with all kinds of people, from office staff to like animal management and people who are making diets for the animals, like food prep. You work with a very wide plethora of professionals who care very deeply about their work. And whether you're talking to a veterinarian or someone who works at the front gates, those soft skills are universally applicable the same way they are whether you're talking to an engineer or you're talking to a designer or you're talking to an artist, or a client. It really, just being able to work with people, being kind and affable and empathetic. I think those are some of the most important skills that I've honed over the years.
Did you realize that coming in, or did it like something click at some point? You had that answer seemingly ready to go, so I'm curious. It's like you picked up on this already.
I mean, people have asked me that before. It's not a common jump to work at a zoo and then a game studio. And prior to working at the zoo, I worked in broadcasting. So you might look at some of those different endeavors and think, what is the commonality there? So a lot of project management skills, a lot of growth mindset, just being open to whatever comes your way, saying yes, and let's work together to figure this out.
What's one misconception that studios still have about player support that you wish you can erase from the industry forever?
I would say the demographics of a gamer. I don't know that the studios necessarily think that way. I think we understand that there can be a very diverse player base for any game, but I still think that there's a tendency to think, well, what do players of this game want? And while that might be true for a large swath of them, I think it's really important to not count out just how very diverse people who play your game can be.
I think we see the same thing on the marketing side as well. Everyone's like, "Oh, I'm going to create this game," and everyone's on TikTok. And I'm like, well, you're creating an RPG, and TikTok may not be the best place for you. You might want to think about a Reddit or a place where you can tell these stories. And I think that's a great put. Is that you can't just group everyone the same. You have to understand kind of what they are, how they play, what they do. When you're advocating for players inside the studio, what's a moment it feels like that you actually moved the needle internally?
I think one way that we've moved the needle quite a bit is reclaimed language. I think that can be a very nuanced, very complicated topic. And I think when we started moderating, we took the stance, which I still don't think was unreasonable at the time, to say like racial slurs are racial slurs. Like if something is a toxic piece of language, that's definitely something that we want out of our game. And the difference between philosophically making that decision and on an everyday basis going into the moderation software and hearing what people are saying in game and hearing some high five moments, some really good moments where someone is using reclaimed language, trying to take back a position of power from a very complicated sociological aspect, and then seeing that person get banned for using a word that they are trying to take back. That's not something that we considered right out of the gate. And It's something that we don't want to disempower people who are trying to leverage that very nuanced situation. So I think talking to people internally, changing our perspective on the way that we were doing moderation, um, I think that was a big win and something that we've definitely continued to try to keep an eye on, and something that we've continued to try to evolve as we go. I'm not going to say that we got it completely right, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think we've been a lot more thoughtful about where to apply those bans and how to apply those bans.
Yeah, voice moderation's messy, right? And I think, you're gonna miss the first few times. The idea is, can you show progress? Can you make those first few steps, and can you learn from what's going on? Can you just take a step back and explain what do you mean by reclaim language? And what's it something that maybe the rest of the industry can start thinking about kind of learning from this mistake before implementing?
Absolutely. Reclaimed language is a word that we might use, we might consider to be a slur or something that would otherwise be toxic language, but the context of how it's being used, and most specifically, the speaker is the person part of a marginalized group that has been called this word, and now that marginalized group is saying, "You don't get to call us this word. We're going to use this word." Because when I use it, I can take its power back and you can't hurt me with that anymore. That's really complicated when you're talking about something like voice chat and you don't know whether or not the person who's using this phrase in a short snippet of audio is a member of that group. Are they using it satirically? Are they using it to hurt someone who may have said that earlier in the match? So it's very nuanced, and it takes a lot of understanding to say we're not going to ban this because this person is not using it in a hostile way. There's so much more that goes into it than just a transcript or even just the inflection necessarily. You have to think about the reception, the inflection, what has happened previously, trying to identify all of these social factors that are happening within the game. It can be very nuanced and very difficult to discern with accuracy.
What is the last game you played?
I have an 8, a 5, and a 3-year-old at home. We love our Nintendo Switch. I'm trying to remember if it was Cosmic Invasion or if I think it was Boomerang Fu. I think
I
last night
don't know
we
that
played
one.
Boomerang Fu.
Boomerang Foo.
I'm
Okay.
always the pineapple. My son's always the boba tea. So yeah,
We played, me and my 7-year-old, we were playing a lot of Cosmic Invasion this weekend. You guys got all four controllers going?
we do. And the 3-year-old, she's on my team because we have two boys and a girl, and so we're always She-Hulk, and we're She-Hulk and Phoenix, and so
Nice.
she tells me when to switch between the characters, which we lost a few lives along the way, but I think she's still honing her skills.
So, rewinding time, do you remember the first game that kind of made you fall in love with the craft of gaming?
I played a lot of stuff. I mean, when I was a young kid, we had the old Macintosh, like black and white screen. I'm dating myself right now. Played a lot of Tetris, played a game called Shuffle Puck Cafe. I played Helicopter. Those were all fun and formative, I think, in my younger years. As a teenager, if you want to go like a deep cut on games, I played a game called Titanic Out of Time. And
Oh
it
man,
was, I think it's been re released on Steam. It is magnificent. And it was like out at the same time as the movie. So it was like a teeny bopper. Fell in love with the movie, fell in love with the game.
that
Yeah,
was out
yeah.
years and years. I had that game, and it took me like 8 years to beat it. And I realized, like, oh, I can just Google the answers now, and it's just like that was such a creepy game. And I still look at it from time to time because the music, the atmosphere is just like, what is going on here?
Yeah, yeah, it was crazy. This is hopefully not a spoiler alert, but I remember the first time that I was electrocuted in the electric bath. I like screamed, jumped from the computer, and ran across my house. Like the power of gaming, it's incredible. So yeah, I appreciated that, and I mean all the big titles too, like Crash Bandicoot, Mario, all that kind of stuff. I mean it's fun, but then when you realize like it can have the same emotional resonance as other types of media, and then you're like wow, this is really fun. Then you start connecting with other people, and I don't know, games can be so wonderful in a way that I think is exclusive to gaming, that you can bond with other people, you can have these shared experiences. Sure, you can get that like, oh we both saw this movie, let's talk about it, but you are shaping that experience as the player too, and that's tremendously powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's the beauty of community too, right? You kind of build these experiences with people, and you can share about it and talk about it. I didn't realize anyone else ever knew about this Titanic game, and here we are, right? It's Awesome stuff.
Hours of my life into that
Oh,
game. It's
way too
fabulous.
many hours. Love it though. I remember the workout room. I always wondered who works out at these types of rooms.
Yeah, 1912. Who's doing it? No, you just strap the girdle on and you keep going.
One of the things I love talking about is the journey of how you get into gaming, and your story is right up there towards the top. You started at a zoo, and maybe you didn't start at the zoo, but you came from the zoo, and that is so cool. I feel like so many people I know would not want to leave a zoo, but I understand why. But explain to us, how does this even happen? What are you doing at the zoo? Are you always interested in going to gaming? How did you make that leap?
Sure, sure. Well, Greg, you and I were talking about some of our formative games that we played when we were kids. I've been a gamer since I was like on my old school black and white Macintosh computer growing up, and walking around with my pocket Tetris keychain and that kind of thing. So I've always had an affinity for games, and my undergrad degree was in media arts. So I worked a little bit in broadcasting. Ended up at the zoo after working through a few communication based jobs as the communications manager for the Pittsburgh Zoo, and it was a blast. As you might imagine, I'm a huge animal lover. So much fun. So what does a communications manager at a zoo do? Well, I managed our commercial production and video production, our website, and at one point we talked about we got a really cool grant to make an app and a location-based experience. So we talked to a bunch of different studios, and we ended up working with a studio called Schell Games. And so for 2.5 years, from the zoo's perspective, I project managed the creation of an app that showcased it was an app that you could be looking at the lions, and then you could open your app and say, oh, I can identify that lion. Like, it had all of the names of the animals in it, facts about how old are they, and then general information about like whatever animal you're talking about. There were also mini games throughout the park, so you could be at the primate building, and you could play a tick pick game where you hold the phone on your sibling's back and try to pick their ticks, and made all kinds of squishy, gross noises. There were some take home at home games that you could play, like when the app could say you're not at the zoo right now, like let's do zoo trivia, things like that. So I worked with a very talented team at Schell to develop this app, and as we closed on the production of the app, it was so much fun. Still loved my position at the zoo, but Schell Games had an opportunity as a producer opening up, and I saw many universally applicable skills and transferable skills from my position at the zoo to what this new position would require at Schell. So, in the meantime, while I'd been working, I also got a master's degree in organizational leadership. And so, a lot of those things where I was at the zoo and I'm rallying a group of keepers and administrators and people who I would work with to write newsletter articles and things like that. How do you work with people? How do you make sure that everything that's happening, whether you're developing an app or a commercial, it's happening on a schedule, on budget, on time, and you're making sure that that work is continuing to happen. So, and especially with working with the Schell team, I thought I could do this. I feel like I could do this. I haven't worked um, in game development per se, but I knew enough about that process. And my sister is a software engineer, so I knew a lot about development from her. And I thought, I'm gonna take a leap here and give it a try. And they decided to have me. And so
There you go.
it's been a delightful journey. I look back on my days with the zoo fondly, but I wouldn't trade it for the world to not have jumped to Schell. I absolutely love game development and working in a studio and being a part of that process. And now advocating for players. So,
Yeah.
yeah, starting as a producer and then moving into a role within our product team. It's just been an incredible learning journey, an incredible growth journey, and just a true delight.
You have this growth mindset, right? You're able to see the skills that translated, and for example, product management, project management, right? Like, you were doing this at the zoo and they translated to the producer role at Schell Games. Did you initially realize that these skills connected, or once you're there you realize, oh, this is the same thing I've been doing, this is just a different name for it?
I think a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I think when you're doing a position, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to say, that's not part of my job. I don't need to learn about that. I think it's fascinating to just keep an open mind and learn about the other bits and pieces to make the whole, because no one is working in isolation. And so that teamwork aspect that was so important at the zoo, um, there's a tremendous amount of collaboration that happens in software development and game development. So to see that leveraged and to be working with really smart people on an incredibly creative and talented team, it was really energizing to be able to play an app and be like, oh my gosh, guys, we made this. Like, this is really cool. Um, just from having brainstorms and bringing in different subject matter experts from around the zoo and seeing those ideas transformed into something that was playable and entertaining and fun. It's one thing to sit there and throw facts at somebody, and usually animal facts, like, people do like that, but to make it a game and to make it something that they can participate actively in, that was really cool. So to be able to become a part of that journey and to make games and to support players in those games, it's been really fun to discover all of the different aspects of it and learn a lot along the way.
Yeah, coming back to what you were talking about at the zoo, you mentioned something that you can play the zoo app outside of the zoo, right? That means you're engaging with guests once they leave, and that's so important to stay in front of them. And it's like you realize this aspect of community before you got into the gaming world, saying, hey, I need to keep engaging with these people. So now you work with community, you talk with people, and you're getting these feedbacks. And I'm curious, how was that transition to listening to animals and no and people at the zoo, but to listening to the community, understanding, how do I stack rank this, how do I prioritize, how do I make Greg with the silliest requests make sure he seems like he's heard? How did you figure out how to work with the community?
Sure, sure. Well, one cool thing about a lot of zoos, including the zoo that I worked with, is that it's a nonprofit, and so you wear a lot of hats. And I found myself a lot of times not only working with a various number of teams behind the scenes to produce a calendar or a website or a commercial, but also finding myself interfacing with the public. So, what do you do when someone came to the zoo and you're like, wow, they have a really good point. I'm supposed to be on deadline to do this, but they wanted to stop and talk about their visit. Everyone is in visitor services when you work at a zoo. So I think taking that kind of a mentality and applying it to player support, which has like a very strong customer service streak to it as well. It's like, let's make sure that our players are supported, but it differs from customer support in that you're then taking all of that information and potentially working with product managers to build a roadmap of what might enter development in the future. Development teams who have their own previously scheduled work, and you're like, hey, I've got these player logs, and there's clearly something going on here. Can we work together? Can I steal some engineering time? And like, can you maybe take a look at this? And then they do find a bug that we didn't previously QA, and I say that very lightly because our QA team is very talented, and they find a lot of good stuff. But sometimes when things are out there in the wild, and they're behaving differently because they're in a different, people are playing on machines in a different time zone, or with a different format, they can find new stuff. So we want to make sure that we have an ear to the ground to discover new issues. I think it's really important to never discount anything that someone is reporting, because you say, like, well, yeah, we've never seen a report of this before, but like, we should give every single report we get its due diligence. You never want to write off anything because um, well, this seems silly, or this can't be happening, right? Like, you want to take every report seriously until you vet it otherwise. And I think that's been a big learning for me of, like, I'm trying to balance, and this is where a lot of the skill set that I developed as a producer has been very applicable to player support. Like, I want to respect the engineer's time, and I want to respect what we already have on a product roadmap. But here's something that really came up, and I have to, as player support, care about this because I'm the voice of the players internally at the studio. So let's make sure that they're heard. And I understand that not everything is going to necessarily have time to hit development, but let's do our due diligence and make sure that we've at least considered that.
When you look at player support, it has to differ from a VR game to a 3D game, unless people are in the quest and trying to navigate text and keyboards within there. I don't know if you could talk to the tech stack of kind of some of the tools you use internally, but how do you make it easier and accessible for players to easily reach out, be a part of this community? Do you try and funnel them specifically to Discord, or how does that work?
We try to cast a wide net. We have had many discussions internally about, like, wow, is there a way, especially for VR players, to submit a ticket with us from within their headset. You're on a PC. It's more of a trivial ask to say, like, hey, can you just type up real quick what happened, or jump over to our portal page to submit this bug. That's a lot trickier in VR. And so trying to create systems, like, for example, if players are having a problem with another player, they can hit the report button. That automatically on the back end generates a lot of information for our moderation team. So it gives a timestamp. Who else was in the match? A lot of times we'll have someone email us afterwards. There was a player that I didn't particularly care for. Here's their display name. And like, we go to look it up, and 20 people have some variant of that display name. Well, first off, we can't act on a report unless there's evidence of a problem, because unfortunately, sometimes reporting systems can be weaponized against other players. So we want to be cognizant of making sure we make time for, like, looking into an issue from all perspectives. We don't want to assume that someone is absolutely right with what they're saying. We don't want to absolutely say, are you sure that they said this? We want to make sure that everything is evidence-based, and we're doing a holistic job of looking at, like, everything that happened before doling out any kind of penalties to a player. But we also want to make sure that we are looking into any reports that we're getting of toxicity or hacking or cheating or anything like that. So we have some in-game things that generate reports for our team to take a look at. Also, on the back end, we use, for moderation purposes, a tool called ToxMod that automatically processes all of the voice chat that happens within the game, and identifies toxicity as well. So we ran the numbers once, and we figured out, based on the number of players, of just like average active users, we'd have to have over 300 moderators in the game listening to it live to do it without the help of this tool. And so it helps us to sift out what we believe to be our most toxic moments in the game, and then issue either mutes or bans very quickly based on that evidence. So it's all evidence-based. We do use a lot of tools like that help us to get the job done, while also making sure that it's done accurately and quickly.
Thank you for bringing up ToxMod. That's something I know from Call of Duty. I've worked closely with the Modulate team over years, and I'm really curious about real world examples, right? I'm curious if the community had any backlash when they heard about the tools being launched, if you've seen a change for either positive or negative on the engagement between players because of it. And I guess, I don't know how I say this without sounding weird, but was it worth it? Did you see it move the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question, because as we were approaching launch, we decided we really can't launch a game with voice chat without some type of moderation in it. And at the point at which we made the very firm decision, like, we're going to have moderation in this game, it was too late to already add it for launch. So when Among Us 3D initially launched, it did not have moderation in it. So we were able to retrofit. We worked very hard to quickly retrofit a system in place that could hook into the game, and work with ToxMod. So ToxMod does all of the listening, if you will, and the identifying of any toxic moments, and it escalates any potentially problematic moments to our proprietary moderation system, which we've called Airlock Admin. From there, our moderators can review clips and identify where there might be potential toxicity. And for a long while, we were only able to dole out bans. We have since heard that, like, especially from players, like, hey, I'm banned, and this is we were doing anywhere from 1 to 7 day bans, and if you kept offending and violating the code of conduct, you might eventually get a permanent ban. We heard those players say, like, this feels a little unfair. I paid for this game. I'd like to be playing it. So we reduced the ban length, and then we were able to work in a system of muting as well, which is a lot less punitive than being banned. You can keep playing. You just don't have your microphone. You can hear other players. And so now we're on this much more gentle system. So all that to say, when we first launched, we had a number of months, which you could use as a sample size to say, this is the amount of toxicity in the game. That was our biggest complaint with the game. There are other toxic players. I'm being harassed. I would love to play this game, but it's a little bit of a rough environment. And so the game launched in November 2022, and we added moderation in May 23. So about 6 months later or so, and we saw toxicity, a dramatic reduction in toxicity. When we first started moderating, we were seeing at around 8% of players getting bans in the first couple weeks. That dropped to 2%
Wow.
after about a month of moderation. So, and then it did gradually kind of go back up. So it was generally between 2 and 5%. And so we believe that that meant that that moderation is working. There are results there. We're seeing less identifiable toxicity within the game. And then since then, we launched within the last year the muting system. And much more recently, we heard a lot of feedback from players who said, hey, I'm making private lobbies and you're moderating me in my private lobbies. It's like me and my friends playing in a living room. This is not a space that I want you guys listening. We would be vulgar in my house. If this is truly a private lobby, butt out with the moderation. And we thought, you know what, that's fair. It's also a little tricky because people can share room codes who might not know each other. We want to make sure that we're still keeping an eye on this environment. So we launched the ability to have an unmoderated private lobby, and that's very recent. So we're still seeing the efficacy of that, but we have heard some very positive feedback from players. And there's a lot of guardrails on that system as well. So if you're playing with the youth account, you can't join an unmoderated lobby. If you are joining an unmoderated lobby, the room code is very obvious. It starts with an X to let you know, hey, this is not moderated. You have to opt into unmoderated lobbies. And so we are very explicit that, hey, you're entering this zone where you still have some of the features of being able to report and mute and kick other players, but we want you to be aware, like, we aren't here to try and make sure that everything is adhering to the code of conduct as we would in a moderated lobby. But we've gotten some really positive feedback from players who really want those private spaces. So we've that's just another example of the ways that we've been listening to the community and trying to make sure that those concerns are addressed.
As a parent to a parent, I've been doing a lot of research on Roblox recently and understanding they have new IDs. You got to scan your face in order to be able to do voice chat. Would you be okay with your kids, and they're still younger, but like joining lobbies like this when there's moderation in put in there? Do you have any hesitations? And now I'll say right now, like I would be okay with probably my older one, not my younger one yet. She's only 5, but like joining something like this, I'm okay giving up a little bit of privacy to make sure that it's safe for my child.
That's a really good question, and you already echoed my answer in your answer. So my kids are 8, 5, and 3. I think my 8-year-old is entering into that space. And one of the nice things is with Among Us 3D, we have the option for parents, if you enter your birth date and it indicates that you are below the age of consent, you are required to have a parent like okay all of that. And as part of that verification process, the parent can say, all right, you can play this game, but you can't use voice chat, or you can't do, you have the ability to granularly decide what functionality your child has access to. For example, display names are disabled. You just, if I'm the pink bean, it just is pink. Like it would not have my display name on it. So I think especially in light of that, we try really hard to make sure that it's a safe space. And as a parent, I would feel my 8-year-old has played the game. He, we went to PAX. He had so much fun. We kept getting in the line. I'm like, buddy, we can see other games here. This is like a Schell Games game. We can play this at home. But he like loved playing it, and it was very exciting. One of his favorite YouTubers has played a fair amount of Among Us, so he's like bought in on the concept. I think so much of that, as is true with parenting, comes down to like, what child are you parenting? There are kids who at various ages would be okay with certain things, and some kids need to be a lot older for that kind of thing. And that's where I think the responsibility to a certain degree does have to fall to the parent to ultimately make that decision. My kid can play this game, or like my 5-year-old not ready for this. Like my 3-year-old definitely not ready for this. But like my 8-year-old, where he is developmentally right now, yeah, I would feel comfortable putting him in that game.
Looking here, we're recording this. It's for people watching. It is December 12th, although it's not coming out on December 12th. And I'm curious, we're coming to the end of the year. And when you look back at the year, are there any wins that stand out in your head that you can say, this happened this year, this was great?
Sure. I mean, I do think so. You mentioned it's December 12th. Like, we just launched the unmoderated private lobbies at the beginning of December. So, this is a very fresh concept for us. And I feel really good that we are able to come to a solution that here's some of the very valid concerns that certain members of our community brought to us. I feel like the muting system, which happened earlier this year, a few months back, that is another big one where it did feel too punitive. When we first launched the game and we started moderation in 2023, this was a brand new thing for us. So we kind of took a hard line on things, and then we said, you know what, that was a little unfair. Let's modify our practices. Let's continue to evolve these guidelines. And I think where we are ending up is, and I want to, we're not ending up anywhere really. It will continue to be an evolution and an iterative process. But I think when I look back, especially in the last year with those two big, like auto mute and unmoderated private lobbies, I feel really good that we were able to take player feedback and do something about it that ultimately, objectively, makes the game more welcoming to the entire breadth of our audience.
Super.
That gets me really excited about it. And just like throughout the entire process, um, we've continued to modify our practices. So I think things we've done with reclaimed language, I think things that we've done with just supporting the nuance of a variety of groups has been big leaps. But most recently, those new additions.
Yeah, that's super cool. I think this is going to be technology that's going to be around for a while, especially since we're becoming more of a vocal community based, right? We're talking in discords, we're talking in games, right? I think, learning how to use these tools now and getting ahead of it, just so you can say at least you've tried the training wheels, you know how they work. It puts you on so far ahead of everyone else in this that I think more and more people are going to realize that, hey, we need to build a community first to grow whatever product it is. It doesn't need to be a game, but things grow quicker when you're in a community. And then you have to go roll back and say, hey, how do we moderate this community, right? And I think, again, you're experiencing these tools in a vertical gaming, which has to implement it right away because we have a lot of toxicity in gaming. And I think it's super cool how you're testing these tools out, the learnings that you're getting, how you're hearing from the community, and how you're kind of iterating it from there. Same question, but for 2026, are there any goals or big picture items that you're like, all right, I want to try and do this, or I want to try and solve this for 2026? I don't know if you fill out OKRs.
Just making sure that we continue to listen to our audience, continue to modify our practices, and continue to do the things that have been working really well. I think just keeping an open mind to answer your question very directly, I don't have any concrete new features to talk about just yet, but I know that especially with the tool that we use, ToxMod, with Among Us 3D, I know that it's made by a company called Modulate. They do a great job of continuing to evolve their product as well to better support the community and making sure that we are identifying toxicity and toxicity only. In 2026, we're going to keep rolling with the punches, and in all of our both player support efforts and moderation efforts, I think we'll just continue to listen and see what's working and improve what isn't.
So, Laura, I think the last question I have for you today is that you've transitioned from a zoo to Schell Games, where you were a producer, and now you're handling community. And isn't always clear on what that next step forward is for you. But if someone in your role is thinking about, hey, what would be that next logical step? Have you put thoughts into kind of where your interests lead you next?
Well, I mean, right now in player support, I'm very happy. This position has given me an opportunity to grow something from the ground up. So, as I mentioned, yes, I was at the zoo, and then I moved over to Schell and worked for a number of years as a producer. And then we didn't have a player support department at that time. So when the opportunity came to build something from the ground up like this, I mean, we had the extent of our player support. We were trying really hard, but we had a number of titles of original IP. And when someone emailed about those titles, it went to sort of a hodgepodge distribution list of directors and producers, and maybe a couple Veeps were on the list in our QA department. And it was kind of like, someone gonna get the door? Like, who's gonna answer this one? I'm not entirely sure. Like, this person's on this project now, this person's off. Like, who's gonna get back to them? And so that can lend itself to things falling through the cracks. So when I started in player support, it was first like okay, let's come up with a pipeline to make sure that we can talk with our players. Let's make sure that when they bring something to our attention, it is both responded to and documented somewhere, and then taken back to development teams so that we can properly discern if there is something here that needs some action. And so that was a big initiative, and so now we have that all streamlined. And then along came moderation, when we created Among Us 3D, and we started adding, like, how do we keep our community safe as well, and making sure that we're supporting them in that regard. So I look forward to continuing to learn about everything from trust and safety to responsible ways to leverage AI so that maybe we can get back to people even faster, or with even better information, even more information. How can we maybe integrate some of these features within our games? Can we have better player support options if you're in a VR headset, and you're having an issue or a question? Can we get back to you much faster without you even having to take the headset off? Um, so exploring some of those places and just making sure that we are, with every step we make, we're saying, how is this best serving the player, and also how is this integrating with everything else we're doing at the studio, to make sure that that can be a nice, seamless, like as easy as possible process.
Player experience all around. When you first play a game, I was told you have about 9 seconds, at least with mobile games, to try and capture their attention, right? How do you provide that good experience? How do you make sure they're heard? How do you make sure that you're listening? Like, there's so much to make sure that the player, you can be building the greatest game in the world, but if you're not listening to the feedback from the players, you're going to flop. And I appreciate that answer. I think it's fantastic that you're recognizing this, seeing this, and excited by it. I do have another question to add on to that, is that how do you continue to learn? I've noticed with myself that as I get older, I have my kids and I'm not scouring the web like I used to try and find all these details. How do you find yourself absorbing information on how to continue to grow?
Well, I think we are at a very interesting nexus in history with so many new AI tools, not created equal. They're not all created equal. But for example, one item like Notebook LM, if you catch wind of something, whereas I think you and I are probably of a similar generation, you used to find as many resources. I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to learn about this. I'm going to try to commit a lot of this to memory and think about ways that I can apply it. And there was a huge learning curve for new skills. Now you can plug a concept into Notebook LM, it will help you find sources almost immediately. Do they look viable? Okay, let me see what I can learn from this. And it's generating an interactive podcast. It's generating, like, so many new resources. It's making a video for me to watch. I'm asking it to quiz me on things. Okay, now I've really committed some of this stuff into my own mind, and I can think about that, in a much more dynamic way, and an incredibly blisteringly fast way. Um, Sometimes head spinning way, but there's so much information available to us, that I think, uh, it's so quickly available. I remember reading a book during grad school that talked about what the definition of creativity being the intersection of existing ideas and existing, like, everything that we've explored before, just finding new intersections for those things. And I think AI is able to help us do that really quickly when used responsibly. So I think part of these initiatives of, like, well, what is next and how are we going to do that? I think leveraging some of the tools available is going to yield incredible results with that answer. And I don't know what it is yet, but I'm excited to find out.
I share your sentiment with Notebook LM. I think it's one of the greatest things out there. If I have to read a book, which I don't have time for, I could drop it into Notebook LM, and the podcast it creates is just so good. I'm just like, oh God, how is this creating podcasts so well? And like, I could go to the gym, plug in, and just like listen to these two people who aren't real, engaging in conversation. It is nuts. The one thing that does have me worried, the more I think about it, is like, I love Google Maps. My car hooks up to my Google Maps, and I've learned that like I just trust its directions and timing with traffic. And quite frankly, it's usually not right. It sometimes takes you a longer way, and I'm just thinking like, do we just trust Google Maps at its face now? We don't even look at the directions saying, "Hey, I can get from point A to C, but I can really go faster if I go this way." And it's just like, I think we're losing some skills and replacing that with just the automation. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either, right? There's certain things that are just like, they're low enough level where whatever I have to do. But I'm starting to think that maybe for younger generations, they're going to start taking shortcuts at some of this stuff. And again, maybe it won't be a problem, right? Maybe it's one of those things that, back in the day you had to walk to school. Now there's buses and cars, and maybe you just learn and iterate from there. But I think the technology is great as well as you with the learning, as long as you're making sure that it's giving you that right output, right? I think it's a great way to kind of absorb a lot of information at once in a quicker period.
I couldn't agree more. And I share that same concern. And I think something that gives me hope is that, um, so like my cursive is not nearly as good as my grandmother's cursive, but I can type much faster than she could. And so I think the world and the requirements of the world will continue to shift as well. And my hope is that that delta of like, oh no, we've lost this. Well, the covered wagon is, I don't drive a good covered wagon, but like I can figure out a manual. So manual transmission. It's, I think the transition to new skills and hopefully things like quickly discerning what is a credible source as I'm trying to learn something, or I've used Gemini for some Python coding. I can write basic HTML, and so being able to learn a little bit about that along the way, I think we're at an exciting time and there will be some refinement. But I do think that it will buoy everyone, hopefully. I mean, maybe that's too optimistic, but I do think that in time, hopefully our kids' generation will, they'll be able to really soar much faster than we have.
Laura Hall, I had so much fun with today's conversation. I'm sorry if I mentioned zoo too much, but it was super exciting. But I just love your whole story, how you've learned, how you've grown, how you've implemented these tools, how you've just kind of witnessed everything happen. Before we do end today, you want to share where people can find you or Schell Games?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, to stay up to date with all things Schell Games, our Discord's the place to be. You can chat with us and find out all of the upcoming events everywhere on social media. Like so, Schell Games is all over the place there. If you reach out to player support, if you have any questions about anything you heard today, I'd be happy to answer you that way as well. So you can do that through shellgames.com. And it has been an absolute delight for having this conversation. Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
Of course, we'll have Laura's information as well as Shell Games at the Player Driven blog or website, whatever we're calling it these days. And we'll be talking about it for the whole bunch of days after that. So, Laura, again, it's Friday. You're off today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend or a great weekend, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, and the same to you and all the listeners.